Greetings, fellow gardeners. Recently, I had a question from a person who just bought a brand new piece of property about how do you lay out a piece of property with your plants, your garden, fruit trees, orchards, so on and so forth. And it just kind of dawned on me that, I've never really talked about that very much, have I? It's something that I did for a living for many years, and so I guess I know a thing or two about it. So let's talk about it. If you have blank slate, or you want to remodel things in the yard, or whatever you're up to there, there are certain ways that we get started. So we have to start with certain parameters in mind. And one of the first things that we're going to do when we decide to make a plan for how to plant a garden and an orchard is to understand the environmental aspects of the site. And so right now, for instance, the sun is coming in and getting right here into my left eye. Well, what that means is always south. Okay? And that's real important. No matter where you are here on planet Earth, because of the way the Earth rotates, the sun rises in the east. You always know that that's where the sun's coming up. And you can find the morning sunrise at a 90-degree angle to that. If you were to stick one finger here out towards the sun and put the other one straight out in front of you, you'd be pointing due south. And then, of course, if you have the sunrise over here on the left arm, then the sunset will be on the right arm. Of course, north is to your back. The reason this is important is in the northern hemisphere, the sunlight comes in at us from a southern angle generally. Now in summer it will move around behind our heads even a little bit, but nevertheless still tracking from the eastern part of the sky across the southern part of the sky over to the western part. And the north is generally where cold winds come from, winters, cold air, and so on. In the mainland United States, our prevailing winds come from the west. And so if you're going to put up large trees, for instance, to use as a windbreak against cold winds in the winter and west winds during most of the rest of the year, you're going to want to place those tallest plants on the north and the western sides of the lot that you have. The vegetables, which are the smallest things that you'll probably be dealing with, they all have to go to the most southerly spot. So you go out, you find which way the sun comes up, and you figure out which way the light is entering in the yard, and then immediately you already know that the tallest materials you're going to put in, they're going to be behind you to the north somehow, and the shortest stuff is going to go to the south. All landscapes going to kind of go like that, from the south going upwards towards the north. If you don't do it that way and you put all the tall stuff on the south side of the lot, well, it's going to block all the sunlight. Maybe half of your lot will be good for doing nothing but growing ferns and mushrooms, and then that's not going to be good. So you want to pay attention to where the sun tracks and allow the maximum exposure of light coming into the landscape. So this is number one. Okay, that's number one. Plants need sunlight. You consider that first. The next thing you're going to look at is, what are the pre-existing features in the yard? Do you have a large tree that's staying? Is there a boulder? You're going to want to plant paths, maybe arbors, pergolas, things like this. Once you've decided on the environmental factors in the site, where the sun's coming from, where the winds come from, where the cold comes from, and you've got that all set into your mind, the next thing is, where are the big pieces in the yard that are going to affect things as far as how they lay out? Is that tree staying? If that big tree's staying, it's going to create a lot of shadow around the bottom of it, and it's going to become a major feature in that landscape because of its size, and so you have to work around that. And so it becomes something that gets planted in the design first, and everything else is then planned around that. Once you take a look at the way things are and you decide, well, I'm going to be walking here, I'm going to be walking there, and so on, well, I'd say the next thing to do is to go in and plan those paths so that you break the landscape up into different quadrants. Say that, well, over here we're going to do greenhouse and production, over here we're going to do food production, over here is going to be an orchard, and so on. And you want paths that logically run through all of this. Back years ago, a lot of us used to plant lawns over everything. Now, if you're living in the western U.S. where it's dry, that's probably not a good idea anymore. And so lawns you can walk on anywhere, okay? When you go away from the lawn concept, you really have to establish paths, because you might be using plants in the landscape that aren't going to take your traffic. If you walk on them, you'll go kill them, unlike grass, which you can trample on, play soccer on, and so on. So that's, again, a consideration, is the paths, the flow. And the flow has to be logical. You think about, well, if the car comes in the driveway here, maybe if I'm bringing in a load of compost or something, what's the path from where I'm going to unload to where it's going? If you have a greenhouse and potting facilities, you're going to be hauling materials there all the time. You're going to need to figure out where to put that so that you can unload materials into it without having to kill yourself to get them there, and so on. So that would be step 2. Step 1 is the environmental factors of the site. Step 2 would be the large and stationary hard features of the site. So we go ahead and put the points of the compass, we draw the outline of the property, we go ahead and we place in pre-existing items that are staying, then adding in the hard features around that. Then we begin to start to put in the plants. And once we go to doing the planting, there'll be other more micro aspects we're going to deal with. So for instance, if you're doing apple trees, not all apples are self-fertile, and so you're going to need to accommodate at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 different apple trees in the scheme so that you have enough pollen. Well, the apple trees really should be kind of side by side. That helps a lot to get the pollen across. So now we already know 3 varieties of apples that are going in the yard have to be put where? Next to each other. Now let's say you want to grow walnuts, or you're going to grow macadamia nuts or some such thing. These are big trees, all right? They're never pruned down to little tiny bushes or anything. They just don't work that way. And so they're going to be very large specimens in your landscape. Now, when it comes to, say, macadamia, for instance, macadamia is an evergreen tree. It's dense. It works as a really good windbreak if you happen to be in a climate where the plant will survive. And so it's a pretty good thing to use in the home garden somewhere up there towards the north fence line, towards the west fence line, to block the strong flow of air coming in. If you could slow down the prevailing winds, your landscape will probably remain a little bit warmer and your plants will probably perform better. You won't have as much bruising in your fruit and so on. Avocados get the skins all smashed up, or the fruit even falls out of the tree if they're swinging too much. So as you're putting in citrus, for instance, well, not all citrus are created equal in size. If you got a kumquat, well, that's a little guy. A Meyer lemon, he's a small thing. On the other hand, a Eureka lemon or a Bear slime, these are great big things and they grow real fast. So as you plan to put these things in the yard, you do have to pay attention to the requirements of each and every individual plant that's going in there and the differences between other similar plants. In the case of most apples, there are more round and more upright trees, but generally it's not that important. With citrus, the difference is pretty striking, and I would not plant a Meyer lemon on the north side of a Bear's lime. This is not a good plant. So pay attention to the size, stature, growth rate of the different plants to figure out how they're going to get put in. Vines have their own issues, and so you're going to have to accommodate if you're going to grow vines, if it's going to be grapes, and so on. Air circulation around some plants is very, very important. In the case of grapes, you want the air moving through there. Roses, same thing. Otherwise, they get fungus all over them. And so, despite the fact you're going to be stopping some of the strongest winds from coming in, you still need to have good air circulation around some of the crops. So, picking spots where this happens. We have another factor, too. And if you're growing plants that are tender in your environment, and you got to pay attention to microclimate for placement. Almost every landscape has a certain amount of microclimate. Now, micros are probably less important as you enter northern Minnesota, but they still exist. All right. than they are, say, in California. The more borderline the climate between being a hot and a cold place. If you have a really moderated type of a climate like we have here in Hawaii, for instance, then microclimates can really be a major thing. It can be the difference from 10 feet away over there, it freezes every winter, but over here it never freezes. And that can happen in climates like California or in Hawaii, Hawaii, it's more like it's wet over here and it's dry as a bone over there. We see that a lot. Okay, so that's also microclimate. But when you have plants that love heat, plants that don't take frost, but you're going to try to grow them anyway, where you may be getting frost, well, then you look for the microclimates. Well, one way to find those, of course, is going out there on New Year's morning when it's nice and frosty in the yard and walk around and look for places where maybe there's no frost settling. You walk around with a thermometer. Do it early in the morning, the south side of a house is a pretty good place usually. It's a warmer spot. The walls heat up. They hold some heat overnight. I had a barn in northern Wisconsin with a stone wall on the south side. That was a really good place. The stones would heat up in the sun. They'd re-radiate heat at night. I wouldn't get frost along that barn wall at times when I get frost in many other parts of my landscape. So understanding your local microclimates is really important. They're usually either in places that heat up really well during the day, have materials that will hold heat overnight, re-releasing it, and hopefully have some sort of an overhang. Now the overhang can be just an eave of a roof, but it can also be the edge of an evergreen tree. The south side of large evergreens usually don't have much frost on them. They're going to be sheltered. And at winter, when the air is rising at night, your heat is escaping from the planet and going upward to deep space. If there's some sort of an overhang, it traps that air and makes it cycle back down. And so it creates a loop of warm air cycling against the south sides of tree canopies, against the south sides of house walls that have eaves, and so on. Fences don't work too well. Maybe masonry fences, if they're concrete, they may hold a little heat. But the fence doesn't have the overhang over the top. That's what's important. The heat going up, striking a surface, and coming back down. And so knowing where the microclimates are located to put your tender plants. Again, another feature. But past those basic things, the next step we want to go to, and I get this question from people a lot, and I don't quite understand why, and it's, Bill, what should I plant in my garden? Well, what do you eat? In other words, what's the function here? Is it supposed to be a garden for cut flowers because you like to do flower arranging? Hey, then that's the basic plan here. That's your focus. Is it an herb garden for medical and healing plants? There's a lot of people do that stuff. Is it a basic food garden for the home? What are the purposes? So you have to determine what is the purpose of this garden. How do I plan to use it? And it could be a multi-purpose. You could have fruit production, medical herb production, and flowers, all together. They do work within the same plan. And matter of fact, you're better off if you do that. I hear a lot of people say, well, I got room in my yard for flowers and stuff like that. That's, flaky stuff. Well, you get gardening long enough, you begin to realize that flowers are food for the mind. You need to have them. They're beauty. They grace your landscape. They make everybody feel better. And they draw in the pollinating insects and a lot of valuable creatures into the landscape, And so if you're too tight in your focus and you don't generalize a little bit and start to put in a little bit of everything out there, then chances are your plan will not be as cool. All right. It's sort of like, you drive through Iowa and it's a monoculture of corn and soybeans, pigs, corn and soybeans, pigs, right? Well, that's what your landscape looks like when all you put in it is food. And so integrate those things and put them in between, next to, and around each other, too. I really believe that the flower garden integrated in with the herb garden and along with vegetable food and so on is the best way to start putting things in. It's the way nature does its work. Nature gilds and groups plants. We don't segregate this plant over here and that plant over there. So then the next step is, of course, when looking at the heights of plants and the size and the shadow and the shape and so on, is how do the individual shapes and sizes fit together in relationship to the light and the air circulation. So generally look at the ground floor soil surface as being, number one guild. That's where all the flattest stuff will go. And so if you have ground covers, if you're using cover crops or something on this order, that's where that stuff's going to go. It's going to be the first tier. And then next to that, you're going to have plants that might grow to 12 inches high, and then they're going to gild upwards into plants that are going to grow to 2 and 3 feet high, and so on. And you work all of this stuff together in size and shape. So there you have it, the basics of design, how to go in and look at your property and decide how to get started laying things out. We'll cover things in more detail as we move forward into the future, because I think I am going to do some series on making design and plan here. So aloha, happy gardening, have a wonderful summer.